Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 1/25th scale DeLorean Time Machine Mark IV from Back to the Future 3. This model is made by Polar Lights and is a snap-together kit. I saw this in a store a while ago and was really tempted. You might remember me posting about it on Twitter. As you might have guessed, I went back and spent probably a little bit too much money on it. Back to the Future and the DeLorean Time Machine are awesome though, and the third movie is my favourite of the three, so no regrets. The back of the box has a bunch of words, some images of the completed and painted model, and shows us the 3 other DeLorean models available. Inside the box there's a whole bunch of sprues in their own plastic bags and a couple of cards here. This, while not a sprue per se, is one of the more interesting parts. The car body comes pre-coloured and obviously looks like a nice brushed aluminium part. It's plastic, but it's been coated in something. I wasn't quite expecting this. Looks nice though. Seeing this part kind of forces me to build this so that it can be taken apart for painting. It would be too hard to fix the errors on the body. Fortunately, it is a snap-together kit, so it's not too big an issue. The rest of the parts are okay. The detail is a little bit soft, as is the actual plastic itself, but it's quite adequate. That's not to say they're bad, just not as sharp and neat as I was expecting. I'm not sure how old this moulding is, but I get the feeling that it's not super new. Either way, the parts look fine. They do, unfortunately, have a fair bit of flash and some annoying mould lines that will need to be cleaned up. I do like that an interesting and relevant base is included as part of this kit. There's also a clear plastic part which doesn't take me long to dirty up with fingerprints, 2 metal axles, and a sprue with headlights and tail lights. This has been dipped in some kind of metallic coating. It's very shiny. There's also a couple of sheets with license plates. One of these is a decal sheet and the other is stickers. It's nice to have options. The white thing on the right is a piece of double-sided tape. Finally, there's this sheet of instructions. These are helpful for those amongst us who want to put the model together correctly. These instructions are pretty simple and easy to follow. The first step in those instructions is to assemble the dashboard here. This involves removing mould lines of course and cleaning the flash out of the mounting holes. Then I glue this alarm clock thing into its mounting hole here. I will be gluing some of these assemblies together just so that it won't fall apart when I disassemble for painting later. Next, I clip the steering wheel into place. I think this is the right way up. I add glue behind the part here in an effort to not make too much of a mess with the glue. I'm pretty confident it won't be too hard to paint this assembly while it's all glued together. I'm mostly worried about the exterior parts there. Next come the seats. These clip into place quite easily. You just need to apply a little pressure to get the clip parts into the holes. I guess that's the entire point really. These should stay in without glue, but I glue them in anyway. Next comes this thing. This one was actually pretty fiddly to get into place and I had to use the back of my knife to help force the part in. Again, glue on the back of the parts. Then comes another component of whatever this bar thingy is. Nothing tricky about gluing this into place. Then comes the rear wall of the cabin. Is it called a cabin when it's in a car? Whatever, this wall has the flux capacitor on it and it slots into place here. I did have to apply a fair bit of pressure to get this part all the way down. You do want to make sure it goes all the way in or the interior might not fit into the body later. Also, there would be a big ugly gap which I'm sure you probably don't want. I then attached the dashboard and center console assembly into the base of the interior, or whatever you would call that. Before gluing it into place, I add the internal parts of the doors. This did take a little bit of fiddling and the application of a fair bit of pressure to get all of these parts to snap together, but they do go together. As you can see, they don't quite sit neatly and the parts naturally sit in such a way that there are a few gaps. I remedy this by applying plentiful glue in places that it won't be visible. If it won't be visible, I don't need to worry about neatness. And this is the completed sub-assembly. Doesn't look too bad. This assembly should fit inside the car body with no issues, but to be sure, I test fit. Test fitting is good. Always test fit. To do this, I installed this panel of dials into the roof of the body. It's held there by some pins and the clear plastic window glazing. This isn't too hard to force into place. I will definitely have to try and be more careful with fingerprints when I do the final assembly after painting. I then install the interior. This takes a little bit more fiddling and pressure to get into position. It's easy to cause the glazing to come free of its clips while doing this, but eventually I got there. Make sure to slide the interior part as far back as you can. There's a little tab in the body to hold this in place. Then the bottom of the car goes into place like so. It simply slots into place here like so, with two clips at the front to hold it in place. I then add the headlights. I found these quite fiddly to get into place, mostly because I was trying to use my fat thumb to push them into the recesses. They do go in eventually. These are very shiny, but they actually look better than I thought they would once in place. Might not take too much paint to make these look good. Next, I assemble this cable conduit, or whatever it is. This involves gluing two pieces with cables into either side. Easy enough. Just make sure to press both parts all the way down and into the larger part, and be careful not to bend or break the cables off while doing this. I leave the completed part to sit for a while the glue completely sets, just so that I don't get any onto the body when I clip the assembly on. It is a bit of a tight fit and I had to apply significant pressure to the clips on the ends. Do this carefully, obviously. I then install the brake lights. I had to trim down some nubs on the back of these parts to get them to fit all the way into their recesses. After that, they go into place easily. They're very shiny. Next, this bar part is meant to go along the bottom rear here. It was really difficult to get this part into place properly. I just couldn't get the clips along the top to lock into the body. It just wouldn't work. This was kind of frustrating. I never did get it to sit quite right. I'll just trim most of the clip parts off of this, and once it's painted I will glue it on such that it sits properly. Next, I clip this piece of equipment onto the roof here. This goes on very easily, no complaints here. Then come the two conduits that run from this part down to the part that didn't fit properly along the bottom. This part did require a little force to get it on, but it fits easily enough. Do pay attention though, it's very easy to get this fit wrong in relation to the bottom part. The part at the bottom should slot into the ends of this side part like so. This all went on easily enough except for the bottom part. It looks reasonable though there are a couple of gaps where the parts join. Nothing too serious though, and they can probably be fixed. And now for these. I don't think they're engines, are they? I think they're part of the time kajiggering stuff. Either way, these go together quite easily. I then add glue to the inside and they can be clipped into place. Like most of these clipped together parts, a fair amount of force was needed to put this into place, but it does go in and stay in. Make sure to install these with the holes for the cabling facing out and away from the DeLorean's body. I don't like the gaps in the parts here that allow the clip part to flex. I will probably fill those in before painting. Next, there's a cable to each of these nacelles? Pods? Whatever they are. These are specific and slightly different parts for either side, so be sure to use the correct parts here. I used the back of my knife to apply pressure to the base of these parts to snap them into the mounting holes. You could use a tool without a sharp blade to do this for more safety. The Mr. Fusion then clips into place between the two pod things. Nothing especially tricky about that, though the detail does seem a tiny bit lacking and doesn't quite look right, though I can't put my finger on why exactly this is. Maybe it just needs some paint to make it look right. Next comes another piece of cabling. This runs between the Mr. Fusion and the forward wall part. I found this part very fiddly to get into place. It seems to be a little bit too long for the space it should fit into. Got there eventually though. Next comes another cable. This one goes into the two holes here and it was very easy to install. And that's everything installed at the back here. It looks kind of complicated in there. Next, I build the 1950s time circuits assembly. This isn't overly complicated, just make sure you first put this cabling piece into the side of the small box before attaching it to the rest of the circuit box, especially if you're gluing the parts on like I am. That box is what holds the cable part in place. I glue that box on next and then this cable goes on the top like so, very easy. Next, wheels. These are simply slid onto the metal axles. The sprue gates on these parts were thick and huge. I tried to clip them off neatly, but they're still a bit messy and not perfectly round. Shouldn't be too visible though. The axles then slot through the base of the car very easily and then the other wheel can go on. This should be enough to hold them in place. There is a little bit of lateral play here, but it's not a huge deal. I like that this is free rolling. I then sit the 1950s time circuit box on the front here. There's double-sided tape to hold this in place, but I think when this is painted I will glue it on instead. And that's the Time Machine DeLorean complete. Now for the base. This is really easy. You simply slot the rail parts onto the sleepers on the base. The space between the rails is 57mm. I don't believe that is an actual model railway gauge, but it would be awesome if it were. I would love to be able to replicate the scenes where the train is pushing the DeLorean. The car does fit onto the tracks properly, but it is quite a tight fit and the car has a tendency to want to derail. This could be fixed by filing down the flanges on the wheels or gluing it to the rails. Either way, it's complete. I do rather like this model, mostly because I love the Back to the Future series and I think the DeLorean time machine is awesome. The third movie is probably my favourite of the lot, mostly because it has a train and I was really into trains as a kid. Young Herbert would have really loved to have this, though he probably would have messed up the build and ruined it with paint. Old Herbert also likes having this model. I think having it mostly unglued should make the painting a little easier and eventually I will actually paint it, which will definitely help make it look good. Right now it just doesn't look quite right because of all the grey. This was pretty easy to assemble. Most of the parts fit together fairly well, though a fair bit of force was required for some parts and I was actually worried I might break some of them before they went into place. Fortunately that didn't happen. The details are reasonable, though I still think they could be better. More sharp, I suppose. The most tricky and annoying part of this build was removing some of the flash and mold lines, especially in the windows of the body. The part is of course plastic coated in some kind of aluminium-like finish. That's not really a bad thing, but it does mean that if you slice off mold lines too heavily, you'll see the plastic colour underneath, which is obviously going to look bad. I did manage to clean it up without damaging it too much. Fortunately, the mold lines on the body aren't too bad. I am sure this model isn't super perfect and screen accurate, and that might bother some. Not being an obsessive rivet counter, it doesn't bother me. It's perfectly clear that it's the time machine from the third movie. That said, when I do paint this, I want to do a really good job and get the colours to be as screen accurate as I think is reasonable. By which I mean I want to paint the parts the right colours, though I'll probably use a close enough approach. If anyone knows of any resources for painting the Back to the Future DeLorean, post them in the comments section below. That would be really helpful. So I think this is a pretty cool model, though it might not quite be worth the price I paid for it, $88, which is kind of a gimmick pricing. If you can find it cheap and it interests you of course, definitely pick it up. And of course, don't forget to do things like subscribing here on YouTube and following me on social media. And if you really like what I do, you can always help support the channel over at patreon.com/HerbertErpaderp. Check the links in the description for further information. I shall return soon, so until then, happy time travelling and thanks for watching. Farewell.